Conspiracy theories. It seems that they're everywhere now, with QAnon and the Great Reset and any number of other variants. They've never been so high profile. How do you know whether you're facing a totally made up conspiracy theory or whether you're confronted with an actual real life conspiracy? Because after all, we've seen such things in history. Well, let's dive down the rabbit hole and see how far it goes. I suppose an obvious example of a real-life conspiracy would be Nixon and Watergate, where Nixon's men broke into the DNC's headquarters to photograph campaign documents. When they got caught, the administration tried to cover up its involvement, and the rest is history. If you look at any list of conspiracies that turn out to be real, you'll find that they contain a number of common features that you will generally not find in the popular made-up conspiracy theories. First, their goals are usually very limited, achieving one or two ends, easily defined and with an obvious motive. The limited goals is the easy part of that. I found that people who are deep into conspiracy theories develop quite odd ideas of what constitutes an obvious motive. Second, they take place within a relatively short time frame. And third, the number of participants is relatively small. The larger groups involved, the less likely a genuine conspiracy can be successful, because the chances climb exponentially. Someone will mess up, someone will let the cat out of the bag, and so on. Note, we do not include in this discussion covert action taken by nation states against each other, espionage and the like. Hostile state actors are something we should be concerned about, but they're a different phenomenon. With that caveat, we have no examples in history of successful conspiracies that significantly fail to meet those three criteria. And that shouldn't be surprising. The more you move beyond any of those three criteria, let alone all three at once, the more likely a conspiracy fails or gets exposed. However, conspiracy theories tend to have features that are very different to real-life conspiracies. One, they're extremely wide-ranging, often leading to massive plots to enslave, oppress or eliminate large numbers of people, if not the entire world. Two, they're held to have existed over extended periods of time, sometimes even centuries. And three, they involve huge numbers of people, frequently including high-profile figures, weaving in newly high-profile figures when they come to prominence. And four, the conspirators never seem to make any mistakes. They're credited with supreme competence, remarkable abilities to take actions in full knowledge that they'll spark a long chain of highly unlikely consequences that will magically meet their ends. Of course, there have been conspiracy theories for a long time, and the nature of these theories go through fashions. We went through a phase where they were focused on studying evidence for signs of an alternative explanation to the mainstream. So, for example, those that held that the moon landings didn't take place, they would fixate on the video footage and the photographs, trying to identify little clues that they thought would prove that it had all been done in a TV studio or whatever it was that they were arguing. The assassination of JFK, they would obsess over the angle of the gunshots. UFO conspiracists would be studying photos of flying saucers and maps and trying to concoct a story out of them. But then the most modern versions changed, in some ways reflecting older forms of how these used to work. They have become highly embellished and colourful, but they present no evidence. As Russell Muirhead and Nancy Rosenblum say in their book, A Lot of People Are Saying, the new conspiracism is something different. There is no punctilious demand for proofs, no exhaustive amassing of evidence, no dots revealed to form a pattern, no close examination of the operators plotting in the shadows. Instead, we have innuendo and verbal gesture. A lot of people are saying, or we have a bare assertion, rigged. A one-word explanation that evokes fantastic schemes, sinister motives. This is conspiracy without the theory. And in his book Red Pill, Blue Pill, David Neiwart says that the shift from one form to the other happened after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, with all the speculation that it was the product of an inside job. The 9/11 conspiracies had fertile ground to grow in because the Bush administration was keen to avoid charges that it had been asleep at the wheel, so it tried to stonewall attempts to investigate the attacks and tried to avoid an official commission to look at the causes. The clear sign of an administration trying to cover something up, and that allowed the imagination to run free over what people thought they might be trying to cover up. Well, of course, the obvious answer, routine incompetence, was obviously not as interesting as some of the versions that actually started to circulate. But incompetence it was, as revealed by the former National Security Director Richard Clarke in his eventual book covering the period. It's easy to believe that such theories are all very modern, but conspiracy theories have existed going well back into history, and they've been associated with some major real-life outcomes. One of the oldest conspiracy theories is known as the blood libel, the claim that Jews used the blood of Christian children to leaven their matzo dough, because that would obviously be a rational thing to do. Unfortunately, there has always been a willing audience for outlandish claims. And across history, there have been around 150 recorded cases of Jews being tortured or murdered because of belief in the blood libel. Other historical conspiracy theories were also created with the aim of making large groups into scapegoats. For instance, in the 17th century England, the Popish plot was created by Titus Oates. You might say he was the Alex Jones of his day. He claimed that there was a massive conspiracy by the Catholic Church to assassinate King Charles II. As a result, there was panic, and a number of Jesuit priests and Catholic nobility were imprisoned. Now, Oates was eventually found out, and he spent 3 years in prison for perjury. Then there's a big one, still living occasionally in the discussion forums of some of the videos on this channel. It involved the Bavarian Illuminati. The typical retelling of the story goes like this. Between 1776 and 1785, this elite group met in secret with the aim of overthrowing the monarchist rule in Europe and replacing it with an Enlightenment-based society. Nowadays they'd call it a technocracy. Led by a professor of philosophy, Adam Weishaupt, they started out small in number, growing eventually to hundreds, maybe even as many as 2,500 members. Much of their recruitment came from Freemasons, as it happened. Eventually, though, the rules of gravity kicked in. Once it had grown to a certain size, it wasn't long before the cat was out of the bag. And in 1785, Charles Theodore, the Elector of Bavaria, banned all the secret societies and Weishaupt was exiled. Dr. Tony Page, who translated Weishaupt's defence of his actions, describes it somewhat differently. Weishaupt's plan was to educate Illuminati followers in the highest levels of humanity and morality, so that if Illuminati alumni subsequently attained positions of significance and power, such as in the fields of education and politics, they could exert a benevolent and uplifting influence upon society at large. His project was utopian and naively optimistic, and he himself was certainly not without flaws of character. But neither he nor his plan was evil or violent in and of themselves. It is one of the deplorable and tragic ironies of history that a man who tried to inculcate virtue, philanthropy, social justice and morality has become one of the great hate figures of 21st century conspiracy thinking. And indeed, the concept of the Illuminati as a secretive, privileged elite looking to take over has inspired a great deal since then. For example, a conspiracy theorist priest in 1793 claimed that the violence of the French revolutionary Jacobins was the fault of the Illuminati, which he claimed was aimed at destroying Christianity and the church. That story eventually reached George Washington, who believed it and was concerned to see that the Illuminati's reach into America wasn't too far advanced. Well, at least he didn't end up actively promoting it. Some key figures have been taken in by various conspiracies, In the 1840s, for instance, in the US, Samuel Morse, the inventor of Morse code, spread the conspiracy theory that Irish and Italian immigrants were papists who were loyal to the Pope and in league with Europeans who hated America's democratic institutions and were plotting their downfall. Now, you see what I mean about the way these objectives get framed. Those stories helped create the nativist movement. We saw violent riots where scores of Irish immigrants were killed, and so on and so on. There was the hoax of the Protocols of the Seven Elders of Zion, which claimed to reveal a massive plot by Jews to seize control of the world and destroy Western civilization. Of course, that one took in Henry Ford, who published the protocols and sold them at Ford car dealerships. And it was used infamously by Hitler, who wrote in Mein Kampf that even though the Times of London had exposed the protocols as a hoax, the important thing is that with positively terrifying certainty they reveal the nature and activity of the Jewish people and expose their inner context as well as their ultimate final aims. He was by no means the last person to claim that even though a conspiracy theory might have been shown to be factually completely wrong, you could nevertheless go on insisting that it told a deeper truth, a claim not specific enough to be completely unfalsifiable. And modern conspiracy theories, which become arcane and complex, often do so by absorbing some of these historical elements and building them into their own mythology. So in the 1980s, William Cooper created an all-encompassing conspiracy theory published as the book Behold a Pale Horse in 1991. It suggested that John F. Kennedy's assassination, along with a number of other famous mysteries, were secretly the doings of, yes, the Illuminati, who weren't people at all, but an alien invasion. They'd also produced the protocols, which could be read as a manual for an alien takeover of the Earth. HIV/AIDS was man-made and used to target various groups, a theme that's had echoes inevitably with the current coronavirus. Before then, there was the John Birch Society. Founded in 1958 by Robert Welsh, the Birchers were, and indeed still are, a right-wing anti-communist group, but they quickly specialised in conspiracy theories, leading William F. Buckley to announce that they were, quote, far removed from common sense. Welsh argued that both the US and the Soviet governments were controlled by the same furtive conspiratorial cabal of internationalists, banks and politicians. They aimed to subsume the US within the United Nations for a new world order, managed by a one-world socialist government. Sounding familiar yet? They also promoted the claims that a derivative from apricot seeds, Latril, I think you pronounce it, was a secret cure for cancer that had been deliberately suppressed. Now, you and I might hear that and think, wow, these same wild stories have been going around, all these conspiracy theories through the decades and the centuries. They all sound very similar. Surely, if you hear that and you're involved in one, you will realise that they're all the same phenomenon, and in a flash, you'll see the modern variants as being inheritors of the same nonsense. See them for what they are. But for the true conspiracy theorist, it all just reinforces their belief, because they'll say, see, they've been working on this plan for centuries. Really? Well, ain't it time they got on with it? Being as they're so all-powerful and competent like. But the New World Order stuff has been around ever since. John Trockman, founder of the Militia of Montana, would talk to audiences about the conspiracy to destroy the United States by the New World Order, a shadowy one-world government group, United Nations, blah blah, Bill Clinton, blah blah, totalitarianism, guns confiscated, concentration camps, and a brutal population reduction program. Man-made weather disasters to create food shortages to become the pretext for imposing martial law.
Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Now look, we could keep ploughing through the history of all of the different stories, but there are diminishing returns. And the real question is, how and why do they work? Why are these often outlandish and intricate stories that to the uninitiated look patently absurd Nevertheless, why are they so powerful and all-consuming to those that embrace them? One element is that they can actually be quite an ego boost. Nancy Rosenblum again described a common pattern for the people who get involved. People don't fit in. They feel dispossessed or alienated or put upon by some elite or expert, and then they have a story that seems to make sense of why this has happened to them. It's a kind of scapegoating. It's incredibly empowering to believe that you have the true picture of reality and everyone else is delusional. And if you look at conspiracists today, even the wackiest, like those writing about QAnon, they see themselves as the cognoscenti. They understand how the world really works, and they understand that the rest of us are brainwashed. It's an important and sobering point, one that you should absorb before you make fun of anyone in that position. People get drawn into such things because they're struggling in an important aspect of their lives. Writer Sean Illing put it this way: I think of conspiracy theorists as people who have rejected a world they don't fit into, and the theories themselves offer a way to make sense of it and invert the cause of the problem. In other words, if I'm unhappy and alienated, it's not my fault. It's these shadowy forces that are aligned against me. Which is only empowering up to a point. Knowing the truth when others don't can give you a dopamine hit, but ultimately it persuades you that you don't have agency over your own life. I mean, that can alleviate you from blame for any bad choices you might have made, but it also really means that you wouldn't be motivated to improve your position. Because, why even try? When the powerful forces are in control, why would you bother? In a 2018 paper, Wood and Douglas pointed to a connection between conspiracy theory beliefs and a perception of being an outsider or separation from mainstream society. And this is a sense that only becomes reinforced as people get deeper and deeper into the conspiracist mindset and try to talk about what they believe to their friends and families. Because it's entirely predictable how that goes. The standard journey is that they end up feeling more and more rejected. Friends try to talk them out of their wacky beliefs, mostly end up giving up on them and leaving them even more isolated than before. And that leaves the community of fellow conspiracists as the one place full of people that's going to initially welcome them and share their ideas and treat them with respect. I mean, it doesn't always last, because a community based on paranoia and suspicion can, end up dissolving quite predictably into internal disputes based on paranoia and suspicion. It's interesting. It reminds me of a research I did on the video looking at whether you could ever have an environmental mass movement. I drew on Eric Hoffer's 1951 book, The True Believer, where he talked about the personality types who would often end up joining the mass political movements. And it's basically the same type, in the same circumstances of alienation. The recruitment methods have moved on though, and have become, if anything, more powerful than ever. Rosenblum explained that these stories exploit some of the basic instincts that human beings all share, such as pattern recognition. We like to think that agents are the causes of things rather than accidents or unintended consequences being the cause. Rob Brotherton, author of the book Suspicious Minds, said that the desire to join the dots leads the modern conspiracist to create impossible tales. The seemingly random, disconnected events that are woven together don't match up with what we know about real conspiracies, that they're limited in scope, number of participants, timescale and purpose. When a conspiracy scenario falls outside not just one but all of those parameters, the chance of it being real is vanishingly small. David Neiwert, in his book Red Pill, Blue Pill, said that the logic of conspiracism tends to follow specific rules. Now, I read his description and realised they're not so far removed from the sorts of beliefs that cults will seek to impose on their new recruits. First, whoever is involved on the other side, the conspiracy, is evil and their intentions are nefarious. The leaders of a plot are not merely immoral, but demonic. Second, the people who research the conspiracy are the heroes and the targets of persecution by the conspirators. Third, any official version or explanation of the story is obviously self-evidently false. While wildly varying alternative conspiracy versions might be circulating, all of them, however different, are deemed broadly more plausible. Only the facts supporting a conspiracist explanation are considered to be real facts. 4. Nothing is accidental. It's all intentional. The conspirators are all amazingly competent, as we've already said. 5. The ejection of some theories that turn out to be unsustainable doesn't undermine the larger narrative. And finally, any attempts to disprove a conspiracy are rather proof that it definitely exists, which is kind of convenient. The other factor is that as we've become more psychologically aware, we've seen the rise of what Rosenblum calls conspiracy entrepreneurs, people who know the psychological tricks to bring people into the net. I talked before about the techniques used by Tony Heller on his climate and Great Reset conspiracies, but he's small beer compared to the central figure, which is Alex Jones and InfoWars. Nyworth says this: one of the keys to Alex Jones's success as a conspiracy peddler is that he recognised early on that there was a community of like-minded conspiracy theorists built around his broadcasts who would contribute facts and propose narratives that further contributed to the growing layers around his alternative universe of conspiracism, as well, of course, as buying his merch, health supplements and the like, which he claimed would help overcome the effects of chemicals deliberately released by government into the environment, which have been proven to turn frogs gay and will do the same to humans. Of course, it's not only about the conspiracy entrepreneurs using the tools of psychological manipulation to make money out of you. There are also foreign state actors who understand the psychology extremely well and have made numerous attempts to stir up conflict in competitor societies. And it's the easiest thing in the world to do. You just have to target messages to a group designed to confirm their pre-existing beliefs and to fuel outrage against their target outgroup. University of Washington information scientist Kate Starbird said this: if it makes you feel outraged against the other side, probably someone is manipulating you. One of the goals is to sow division, to put pressure on the fault lines in our society. A divided society that turns against itself, that cannot come together and find common ground, is one that is easily manipulated. Russian agents did not create political division in the United States, but they were working to encourage it. And one of the techniques for doing that is to encourage people to increasingly remove themselves from the mainstream. The mainstream media, let's face it, can be horrendously biased and manipulative in its own right, so it's not exactly a hard sell. Perfectly sensible people decide not to give it their time anymore, and that's fine. But as Starbird writes, this alternative media ecosystem has challenged the traditional authority of journalists both directly and indirectly. Its development has been accompanied by a decreased reliance on and an increased distrust of mainstream media. Indeed, many view these alternative news sites as more authentic and truthful than mainstream media. Which is fine, so long as it's not part of a process to make you reliant on fantasy, fact-free alternatives with their own agenda. The investigative journalism site Bellingcat did an analysis of group chats among some of the far-right conspiracist groups, and it found that recruitment techniques tended to dominate the discussions. People disagreed on which techniques were the most effective, but they tended to agree that people who react against social justice warriors and political correctness are prime targets. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise, as the social media algorithms have pushed people on both sides more and more to the extremes. They become the best recruitment tools for the other side. The absurdities of a woke brigade can lead people to think their rights are under attack, and they end up moving further in the opposite direction. And Bellingcat reported that conspiracy theories appear to be one of the more well-trodden roads into fascist nationalism. So then the woke activists will point at the visible signs of white supremacy on the other side to rally more people to the cause of reinforcing group identity around those who they perceive to be under attack. And so it goes, round and round. That's just a political dynamic, and it's why we have such a polarised society. But the powerful vehicles on both sides have only a fading grip on reality, whether it's believing that men can become biological women or that the world will literally end in 12 years because of climate change, or on the other side, whether it's believing in conspiracy theories that have Hillary Clinton and other leading Democrats at the head of a paedophile ring based at a pizza parlour. Right now, there's ideological cherry picking of facts and exaggeration of science going on both sides. But at this point, hasn't always been the case, but at this point, the conspiracy theories mostly track to the right. Probably why Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell called them a cancer to the country and specifically to the Republican brand. If you have a friend who's heading down a rabbit hole, is there anything you can do about it? If you want to see a very public example of this, by the way, listen to recent episodes of the London Calling podcast with Toby Young and James Dellingpole. Dellingpole is well on his way down the Great Reset rabbit hole, and they've had episodes with difficult discussions and debate live on podcast, where he tries to persuade his friend that this is all the case. Toby Young tries diplomatically to argue from facts and reason that this just doesn't make sense. The psychologists that have looked at this suggest that if someone is early on the journey, confronting them with evidence to prove the falseness of their theories can indeed help pull them back. If they're already well on that journey, then it's a different process and it will take a lot longer. The point is they probably ended up there because they had real pain and disconnection in their life. They felt they weren't listened to, they weren't taken seriously. Ultimately, slowly, over time, without validating the fantasies, you need to give them positive reasons to step towards the rewards of real life, to help them to believe in themselves and to understand that the world they've retreated from is richer and more worthwhile than the downward spiral of cynicism that they've become a part of. Because people deep in conspiracy theories are not happy people. Now, it's not easy when I get people commenting on these videos, such as the one talking about the Great Reset conspiracy. I tend to respond pointing out that why what they're saying isn't or can't be true. But that is as much aimed at people who might be on the brink of diving into something like that and might be reading those comments, not to the people themselves. Because sadly, once you're in that deep, it takes a lot more than a comment in a video section to make any difference. There are lots of reasons to be sceptical of mainstream narratives, for sure. Politicians lie all the time, on both sides. The mainstream media is partisan and biased, as we said. Not always, but often when it really does matter, yes, they are. Developing critical thinking, always looking to verifiable, well-documented evidence, staying aware of the mainstream, even if you dislike it. These are good strategies if you want to just maintain that healthy skepticism about what, after all, what people are trying to sell you. Drifting into the orbit of those who will tell you all the things deliberately to outrage and shock you about the people you already dislike and fear, and then take you further and further down the path when you're asked to believe in extraordinary things without evidence. When people will point at disconnected things and imply there must obviously be a connection. When people will latch on to high-profile figures as being ringleaders in a massive plot. These are all the warning signs to step away. Now, conspiracy theories are not going to go away. Sadly, some of the people who end up committing the most horrible acts of violence against groups of people turn out, as they often have, to have been brought to that place by such conspiracies. Something to be alert to, particularly for groups that deliberately use such things to push us into a bad place. Because the division and the demonization of others that they create don't just stay with the conspiracists, they get shared to our mainstream political discourse. We shouldn't stand by and just watch that happen.